What's going on, everybody? It is that time again, the Sooners Illustrated podcast, episode 161 on this Friday, March 14th, 2025. Josh Callaway, Collin Kennedy with you on a very windy Friday afternoon in Oklahoma. If you hear it whipping in the background of the pod, I've gone to the quietest spot I think that's available to me in my house, but it is borderline tornado. If you're in Oklahoma, you know what I'm talking about. It is insane today, but we found a time. It's been a very busy week. We've had football stuff going on. Tom's in Nashville with the SEC basketball tournament. We did that show later in the week on Wednesday, and Collin and I were able to squeeze in the recruiting show here on a Friday afternoon. So a bit of an unorthodox schedule. Appreciate everyone kind of hanging with us as we move everything around, but we're here. We have some recruiting stuff we want to talk about with Collin. It was a big weekend last week. Future Freaks. We're going to recap all the latest coming out of it, as well as some of the other notable visitors over the week that Collin wanted to get into on the show today. We also have a big decision coming up for an Oklahoma in-state running back target that we'll talk about a little bit as well. So a lot of recruiting stuff to get into on the show with our guy CK here. But we'll start with what has been the storyline, the thing that most people have been most interested in, because everybody's always interested in quarterbacks, is this continuing saga, Bowe Bentley, Jaden O'Neal, that it got a couple more wrinkles to it this week. So Bowe Bentley was in town for the Future Freaks weekend. Jaden O'Neal, meanwhile, he's on one end, he's moving to Oklahoma. He's going to play his high school football at Mustang right down the road next year, but he also took a visit to Georgia over the weekend. So Collin, fans are just kind of, wondering like how is this going? Is it still potentially both guys? On one hand, Jaden O'Neal visits another SEC power, but he also is literally switching high schools to be right down the road from OU. Paint the picture for us as this thing continues to unfold with these two really high-profile, really talented quarterbacks. Oklahoma is courting both at the same time.
So the good and the bad of recruiting is what I like to call the reality TV equation, right? That's the beauty of this sport and this specific layer to it is everyone's favorite drama until you either have to cover it or keep track of it. So Oklahoma fans are still riding the roller coaster here, and everyone's on the edge of their seat because, like you mentioned, you feel like you kind of get enough significant updates to let this thing ride out a little bit, and then lo and behold, like you mentioned, we've got a whole lot more coming in on the news front between these two. I'll start with Bowe Bentley. I think that, like I mentioned last week or a week prior to that, going into this visit, it was very significant that he visited Oklahoma just before the dead period hit and immediately booked another visit as soon as the dead period passed. It shows that this guy is very interested in what's being told to him by Oklahoma. And I really do believe that follow-up visit was him saying, I'm listening to this message. Like there's a genuine interest on my end in what I'm being told by Ben Arbuckle and Brent Venables. And out of the weekend, I still firmly believe that's the case. Bowe got to spend a lot more time with the OU staff, with Ben Arbuckle, with Brent Venables. I was told he was there for about 2 days, maybe a day and a half. So his visit went on a little bit longer than some of the others that we'll get into today. Got to sit down and have some meetings and some productive conversations about what the next steps look like. I think some of his family was in town as well to have those conversations as well, which really helps, obviously. And so what you're left with on the Bowe Bentley side, in my opinion, is Bowe Bentley at the very least knowing with 100% certainty, and this would probably be the headline, that Oklahoma wants him to be part of this class, whether it's a 2-quarterback class or one. Like they will take him tomorrow and they'll figure it out after that. And so that's significant because you get into then the Jaden O'Neal side of this. Moves to Mustang, and he makes that move, obviously still very much knowing all of this is going on.
Sure.
Right? But I would say that the counter argument to the potential argument that is, well, if you're moving to the state of Oklahoma, that surely means you're locked in. Jaden O'Neal really just needed to move anywhere besides the state of California where he lost a significant amount of game time and opportunity on the field last year. We've gone through that documented situation, and it hurts a player of his caliber to not get those reps, to have those game exposure points. And so moving into the state of Oklahoma was as much about Jaden O'Neal getting to play as much as it was getting to play at Oklahoma, right? And so this visit to Georgia, that was also one that I believe it started on Monday, went into Tuesday. This was kind of a do your due diligence, do your homework, explore an option. And I don't think it really shocked you or me or anyone else, because we've talked about this on the board. Like Georgia's been one that's been in contact with Jaden for a while. But like you and I talked about a couple of weeks ago, there was going to be a point where Jaden O'Neal was going to get a call from a Georgia or a Miami or a Colorado or a Florida State or whoever else, and it was going to have to be decision time. Was he going to go take a visit or two in the unofficial or official capacity? And Oklahoma was not approaching this situation with any leverage. They've pretty much lost all leverage to this point, right? And so Jaden O'Neal rightfully took an opportunity to go see a school that he has some interest in as maybe another option. I think that the trip went well. Not much else to discuss there other than the fact that I don't think Georgia's going away. So continue to kind of walk on eggshells here and see what shakes out. But in general, like, I would say the last thing to answer the last portion of your question, Oklahoma will take one or two, both, or one singular individual. We're going to figure this thing out, hopefully in the summer. But right now it's really starting to heat up. And whether it's Jaden O'Neal or Bowe Bentley, like, someone's going to have that OU emblem next to them at the end of the day.
Continues to be really interesting. I mean, we talked about this a few times, and it's the storyline of 2026. I mean, quarterbacks always naturally are, but then you kind of loop in the fact that it's just unusual. It's just not something that happens very often to guys of this level. And, you know, I said this, you know, when we talked about this last time a couple of weeks ago, that you kind of felt like eventually one of these guys would probably just soften. Maybe they wouldn't both want to come together or whatever. That doesn't feel like it's happening. And yeah, Jaden takes a visit to Georgia, but he's moving to Oklahoma. He's coming to play his high school football right down the road, obviously in Mustang. It's really interesting, and we continue to be all over it. It's kind of the storyline right now of the 2026 cycle for Oklahoma. You know, could they potentially get both these guys? I mean, obviously that would be a huge win for OU, because then you let them battle it out. Whoever ends up being the guy is your guy, you know, and you kind of go from there, whereas you don't have to choose, right? You can just take them both, you know. So we'll see if they're able to pull that off, or if one ends up going a different way, or whatever. But it's really interesting, and Collin's been all over it, and just some more wrinkles to it with Jaden taking that visit, but also at the same time going to play his high school football in the 405 next year. It just makes it all that much more interesting, and I'm excited because it gives me an opportunity to hopefully get a chance to see Jaden in a game next year, which was never going to happen, obviously, out there in California. So pretty cool, and we'll see how it shakes out. And Bowe Bentley continues to be right at the forefront of Oklahoma's kind of primary objectives right now, and he was just in town for Future Freaks, which we'll get more into in just a minute. From a future in-state guy in Jaden O'Neal, who will be in-state guy next year, to a guy who's in-state that we've talked about several times, various times over the last year or two, K.D. Jones, running back up there in Jinx. He's a 3-star for us. He's a composite 4. Obviously, legacy. His father played at Oklahoma. He's going to make a decision this month, it sounds like. Collin, we've mentioned him from time to time on the show over the last, you know, however long. He's been at camps in Norman. He's a guy in state. He's up there in Jinx, a great program in the state of Oklahoma, in the Tulsa area. Sounds like a decision is coming soon for KD. I mean, obvious question, but, you know, maybe not an easy one to answer. Where does OU sit with this? If this is coming to an end, is that a good thing for OU or not? In your mind, Oklahoma in trying to land this talented in-state running back, what's that look like right now for the Sooners?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think Oklahoma is in as optimal a position as the casual fan might assume. Now, if you're keeping up with this race, or you're keeping up with what we're reporting on the VIP board, like, you know, this is heating up. Again, we're going to hear from K.D. Jones this month about his commitment. And it more than likely is not necessarily going to go in the Sooners' direction unless something changes over the next week or so. It could easily be the case because honestly, Josh, like this one's had a lot of ebbs and flows to it over the last week or so. So to make a long story short, Katie Jones accelerates the timeline. He moves it up. He puts it out publicly. You know, March Madness is coming. I'm going to make a decision. And then that whole thing.
Right.
Visits Louisville, I believe, for their start of spring practices. And Louisville has kind of been a sleeper throughout the process. Honestly, I'm going to, say what some are probably thinking. Louisville can get aggressive in the NIL front. They have backing there, and they can entice prospects out there. And look, it's a cool place, right? Then he goes to Kansas, and the order there could be flip-flop, but I know that he also visited KU for the early portion of their spring practices. And I would say that there is no group of commits in the country recruiting Katie Jones harder than the KU 2026 class. They are up to like 13 pledges already in 2026. Kansas class is sizable already. And almost all of those players are taking time to recruit Katie Jones. It's a lot of ears or a lot of mouths pouring into your ears, and it's paid off because on top of that, I think that the Kansas staff has really done well building a relationship here. And from what I was told, that most recent trip to KU put Kansas in the driver's seat. As of a few days ago, I would say the Jayhawks held the lead. Then, yesterday, as we record, Katie Jones visits Oklahoma State. And
yeah,
man, again, for a OU legacy player, someone whose father played at Oklahoma and had a high level of success and had been courted by the Sooners for a long time, I don't know that it was on very many people's bingo cards to have Oklahoma State towards the top of contention for Katie Jones. But that's the case and then some, because I mean, like, for example, for those unaware, Katie Jones' nickname is apparently Batman. I don't know how that I don't know the origination of that nickname, but
it goes hard.
It's crazy nickname. Like, I'm all for it, Oklahoma State, as many Oklahoma fans know, has that gigantic video board in the end zone.
Yeah.
And they put an orange and black Batman logo on the entire video board for Katie Jones to look out at as they made a custom visit badge for him saying Batman on it and had the Batman emblem. And like, Oklahoma State's going all out here. I think now where Kansas, even just a few days ago, probably took the lead, Oklahoma State might be pulling neck and neck, maybe even overtaking KU. And then obviously you have Oklahoma and Louisville still sort of hanging tough. And so I as of right now, I think Katie Jones is not picking Oklahoma. Again, like we've already seen over the course of a few days, this thing can change. Oklahoma could get in there and have some sort of say. But I think as things stand today, someone that I think for a long time was pretty much pegged to go to Oklahoma could easily head elsewhere, and it adds another little wrinkle to this 2026 recruiting storyline.
No, I mean, you're right. Look, I don't know KD, but it has always kind of felt like that's a guy that Oklahoma eventually will secure. It has. It's kind of felt that way, just beyond the in-state thing or even beyond the legacy thing, really. It's more just kind of that relationship has always been there, and obviously it's a guy that we've talked about a few times, and just kind of thought, eventually they'll do what needs to happen. But, as the decision looms, we'll see. Like you said, he's taking those other visits, Oklahoma State, Kansas, Louisville in there, and we'll see how it shakes out. Obviously, you never know until signing day. Things like that could change, but it's interesting, and we'll see. And obviously, I'm sure his dad is as good with go wherever, but that's always kind of a funny thing when you get the OSU in there, and it happens sometimes, obviously. And Gavin Freeman is one that, he didn't commit to OSU, but he's there now despite being OU legacy. Like it happens, right? So we'll see. We'll keep an eye on it. Collin's all over it. We'll let you know whenever Katie makes that decision one way or another over at Sooners Illustrated, Oklahoma247sports.com.
The last thing I'll note as we get out of this topic, as of right now, as we record today, around 3 o'clock Friday, I'm led to believe that the Oklahoma official visit is still on. So,
yeah,
unless that changes, OU is expecting him to be in Norman for the Champion Barbecue on June 20th. As long as the Champion Barbecue visit is in play,
you still feel like you have a shot. Yeah.
You and I both know OU probably isn't going to go anywhere as long as they're getting him on campus that weekend. Should that change, though, and of course, we'll keep you updated on that front, that's when you really know whether or not to take this commitment seriously. I think it's a very interesting dynamic, too, because he's going to make this pledge in March, but that doesn't then take away from what inevitably is going to be a heated recruitment in the summer as well.
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, anyone who follows recruiting knows and has been along with this show the last couple of years, that's always a very fruitful weekend. A lot of guys in town. If you're going to sway them, committed or not, that would be a weekend where you could see him do it. So good note there, and something that we'll continue to keep an eye on. Even if that decision doesn't go his way, we can circle back to in June, certainly, assuming he still makes that visit. And like Collin said, we'll let you know one way or another on that front. As far as we talk about Champion Barbecue, big visit weekend, one of the big visit weekends of the spring just happened a few days ago with Future Freaks Weekend. This is something we've talked about, last year at this time, and we talked about a lot going in. It's a big weekend. A lot of guys come to town. I mentioned just a little bit ago, Bowe Bentley was here. It was a laundry list. We previewed it last week. Collin said north of triple-digit number of players were going to potentially be in Norman. First weekend of spring practice, so they all got to be there, and see the team get out there for the first time last Thursday and obviously over the weekend. Collin, I'll open it up for you. The biggest things that came out of the weekend, obviously you've had lots of coverage over on the website, so that's why it's a great time to become a VIP subscriber right here at the start of spring ball, and we're getting into the postseason now for hoops and Diamond Sports. Great time anyway, but as recruiting ramps up, you've been all over it all week. Some of the big headlines for you coming out of obviously one of the bigger weekends of the spring recruiting-wise for Oklahoma with Future Freaks Weekend. Yeah,
we're going to go quick hitter style here, so if there's anyone you want to expand on, go ahead and interject. But starting it kind of on a similar note with Katie Jones, talking about Jonathan Hatton Jr., right?
Yeah.
The 2026 four-star running back, previously committed to Oklahoma. He was in Norman for the Future Freaks Weekend, huge addition to the visitor list. And I think the big takeaway here with him is that Oklahoma might be climbing back to where it was whenever it previously picked up his commitment. I think around this time, about a year ago. And so Texas A&M has been heavily in the mix. Ohio State's been hovering here. Both, I believe, are on the official visit slate for Jonathan Hatton Jr., but we've talked about it here before. A big reason why Jonathan Hatton Jr. stepped away from his Oklahoma commitment was because he wanted to see what happened with DeMarco Murray. DeMarco Murray is his favorite coach in college football. And I think that now that DeMarco Murray is a little bit more settled in, Jonathan Hatton Jr. is retaking OU seriously on that front. And, he'd be probably the first to tell you he always kind of feels at home whenever he's around OU. It's just obviously when the play on the field presents the uncertainty that it did in 2024, you take your time if you don't have to sign until 2025. And so I think Oklahoma did some damage here. I think they did a really good job hosting him. I think he had a really good time. And I think, again, even though A&M and Ohio State, two heavy hitters, are in play, Oklahoma's going to have him, I believe, for the Champion Barbecue as well on the official visit slate. OU back in firm contention with a player who is truly elite in nature.
No, and that's extremely interesting because, how many times, and you cover recruiting at a very high level, much more than I just kind of keep up with it. How often do you guys decommit and then come back? It doesn't seem like it happens very often. So for Oklahoma to be kind of back in the mix is pretty impressive. And, the DeMarco Murray aspect is interesting because we've talked about it many times. His name comes up for other gigs. We kind of come to the end of every year and you kind of wonder, is this when he might look for something else. And we kind of pondered NFL maybe for him, but he is back. And now here comes Oklahoma making another run at him. So as we talked about it, Collin, you've seen him play. You're very high on him as a player. So if they could find a way to get back in, that would be one of the more impressive recruiting feats, really. Because, again, it just doesn't seem like it happens that often. You lose a guy, you kind of typically lose them to get back in and potentially flip them back to you would be impressive. But something interesting there for sure.
It's extremely rare, especially with, and I always bring this kind of layer up, a player of that caliber, right? I mean, we're talking about someone who is in like the 150s, is a high 4-star running back, is in the San Antonio area. So Texas A&M has a lot of influence. Texas has a lot of influence. And then, I mean, if Ohio State's coming after you, right? Like, so I think the last note here then is Katie Jones, Oklahoma maybe slipping out, but still on the official visits, like Jonathan Hatton Jr. kind of climbing back up, and then Rylan Morris is still hovering out there.
Yeah.
Probably need to get one or two of those three when it's all said and done. And so huge that OU was able to kind of vault forward with Jonathan Hatton Jr. Next guy I want to bring up real quick, 4-star wide receiver Jaden Pettit from the Florida area. He is someone newer to the show. First time we're talking about him.
Yeah.
4-star prospect out of Naples. And I believe has been courted by the likes of the Florida Gators, the Tennessee Volunteers. Talented player, bigger body. First time at Oklahoma. And he takes the trip to Norman, checks it out. They give him his offer at OU while on the visit, and fully expecting OU to get him back at Oklahoma for an official visit in the summer. So OU starting to become a newer presence in this process. Miami is also very heavily involved here. So in a battle between Florida, Tennessee, and Miami previously, now Oklahoma trying to have some say. And I think it's always kind of interesting when you see OU come out of nowhere for a wide receiver, because a cycle ago that resulted in the likes of Marcus Harris and Cortez Mills. Yeah. Obviously, neither one ended up in the class, but you did get those commitments at the time that you surged out of the darkness. So Jaden Pettit, an interesting one. Josh, a favorite of both yours and mine. Toa Katoa, the big man out of U.S. Trinity.
Oh, yeah.
The 6'3", 365-pounder. He was back in Norman for the first time in a while, and I think that's huge because I've mentioned this in the past. I want to say Texas has taken a lead. SMU has been extremely aggressive here. I think I've mentioned this on the show before, but I was told by a source at U.S. Trinity that a number of the SMU coaching staff, including head coach Rhett Lashley, they were at U.S. Trinity a few weeks ago before the doors even opened. Like the school staff had to let the SMU coaches in. They were there that early to go see Toa. Tennessee has been involved. And so Oklahoma, OU, this was one that was expected to be between Oklahoma and Texas. And Oklahoma started to kind of slip out of there. Now I think OU's arguably back in towards the top. So huge to get him back around. And on a similar note, Drew Evers was in town. And I think this was big because he kind of got added to the visit slate late. I talked to Drew and his family for a while a couple of weeks ago, and there was no mention of Oklahoma even in the recruitment at that time. And they were looking at the likes of Ohio State, Michigan, SMU, a few others, Clemson, I want to say. And so I thought things were going their separate ways. He gets to Norman, and I know Bill Beanbo had gone out there to Flower Mound to see him. Now Oklahoma, re-involved a little bit with a familiar face. And so of note there, my guy Craig.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in. I was going to say, you would think, and you could tell me, you could shed better light on it, but you would think the family aspect there, going back to obviously with Nick, I mean, that's a relationship that's been around for a while. It feels like maybe just because Nick was here, obviously, several seasons ago now, that it feels like Drew has been a guy on the radar for Oklahoma for a really long time. So it just kind of feels like you always have a little bit of that leg up. Just he's been around the program. He kind of knows what Venables and Norman. He and his family have a little bit of, they know what they're dealing with when it comes to OU. And I think that would certainly help you. You would imagine in that kind of spot.
Yeah, it was one of those things where it's like, does that provide an advantage or is that putting them at a disadvantage? Because the way that things played out and the level of familiarity there, like when all the rocks are unturned and you kind of know everything that's going on, for lack of a better term, you know all the skeletons and which closet they're in.
Fair enough. Yeah.
What way was that going to go? And it kind of felt like the distance was being created. And so now, to your point, it is significant that they went out of their way in a busy visit schedule to get back to Norman. So of note there with Drew Evers for sure. My guy, Craig Dandridge, everyone knows I'm a big fan of him. I've been kind of beating the drum for this guy out there on social media. He experienced Oklahoma for the first time, had a really good time. Wide receiver in 2026 is very fascinating to me. And so you get a guy from the state of Georgia in town, certainly of note, because Emmett Jones will go into the state of Georgia and recruit heavily. Right now, from what I've been able to gather, I think Craig has official visits booked to Georgia, Georgia Tech, and Tennessee. I think Oklahoma has a chance to be the fourth added very soon. Brian Harris, another Southeast guy, defensive lineman out of Jacksonville, Florida. Little Florida, Georgia flavor tonight here on the show. Yeah. This is one of the hotter recruits in the country right now, has a lot of momentum behind him, has impressed kind of on the camp circuit and the combine circuit. He got to Oklahoma for the first time, and sounds like everything went well. Again, like you try and track down some of these Southeast defensive linemen that might maybe fall through the cracks of a Florida, a Georgia, an Alabama, right? Like maybe you can get one to fall to you. And it might be the case for Brian Harris, especially with the way that things went with the visit. But at the same time, again, like this is someone who's got a lot of momentum behind him. And so valuable visit there. Peyton Houston, back in town, 2027 quarterback. I know we talk a lot about 2026, but like I mentioned a couple weeks ago, a lot going on already for Peyton Houston.
Right.
And you're going to get him for this visit weekend. Had to capitalize on it because he's about to embark on a ton of trips, the likes of, Tennessee, Miami, Texas, a few others are involved here. A lot going on. You wanted to start out strong, and I think Oklahoma did that. On a similar note, though, Jonathan Moore, 2027 quarterback, new offer went out. And he is from St. Louis, Missouri. Oklahoma will certainly get aggressive in that area recruiting. OU is one of the few SEC programs that will recruit kind of the Midwest. Obviously, they'll go in and compete with Mizzou. And so I think it's certainly of note that Peyton Houston came into town.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they sent out an offer, and then more on the 2027 quarterback stuff here in a second. They made a number of quality impressions with 2027 defensive backs. I wanted to highlight John Meredith III. This is a teammate of Toa Katoa's at Euless Trinity. He is borderline 6'3" and 180 pounds. Huge, long-armed. Oh, you did a good job with him. A number of other new offers went out. Titus Hawk out of Choctaw, Oklahoma. I wanted to tip the cap to him. 6'7" tight end who also plays first base for the varsity baseball team there, the Yellow Jackets.
Yeah.
And then the last guy I wanted to mention, I thought this was a cool note. A favorite of mine in 2027. Trey Moore is a wide receiver out of the Pflugerville area in Texas. It's kind of like Austin area. And so Centex kid, he's a bigger bodied kid, 6'3", 6'4", want to say 190 pounds. Big dude. Trey Moore has been on OU's radar for a while, but they have not pulled the trigger. And I believe both Texas and Texas A&M have offered already. OU got him on campus, and they gave him the offer. And this is big because not only is he expected to be one of the better wide receiver prospects in the region, Trey's father, Eric Moore, played at Oklahoma. He was a quarterback at OU, 94 to 98. And so it always felt like more of a matter of when, not if, Trey was going to get the offer. But the when started to kind of drag out there a little bit. So now, you offer another legacy player, guy that, again, like his father played at OU for several years. Very significant, in my opinion, because I think Trey Moore is the type of talent that you need to go after. And so in general, man, it's obviously a very productive, busy weekend for Oklahoma.
No doubt, no doubt. I mean, you mentioned it going in, the kind of level of talent that was coming in, how many guys are coming in. And so, good to hear progress, obviously, on a number of key names. And we'll continue to update there more as we go along. But some progress made. It sounds like a lot of productive gains picked up on a lot of these guys. Oh, I kept myself muted for like almost all that because the wind was just going insane that whole time. I was thinking this, if I was unmuted, it was definitely going to be distracting to you.
Well, I was rattling them off because I was like, all right, number one, I got to get through this fast or we're going to be here forever. Number two, there's so many names to go through. I'm like, I don't want to have Josh have to try and conjure something up for every single guy. But I also was like, dude, I'm going to rattle through these because I don't know what the win situation is look like, but I saw a look on your face like, oh no, like I didn't know what was going on.
This window to my right, I was thinking it might just break in, but we're good.
So I was like, all right, I'm going to fill some space here. I'm going to occupy some room while we let Josh
anyone in Oklahoma
brave the storm.
Relate. They know what I'm talking about. It's insane.
Yes. Two final quick notes out of Future Freaks weekend, highlighting two of the biggest names that were there. On one hand, DeQuivis Beck, the 4-star top. I think we have him at number 153 in the country now. He was 151. Elite talent. He finally gets to visit Oklahoma. He books his official visit, and so he's going to be in town June 6th at OU. That's very significant news. Texas A&M has kind of been seen as the heavy favorite here for a long time. I just think that Oklahoma is really starting to surge with a player who honestly kind of been kept on the back burner, and maybe a bit unfairly. OU did a great job sitting down with him and getting things figured out, and I think the Sooners are a serious contender now going into the summer. And then on the flip side, 5-star cornerback Jordan Edmonds, my guy, he gets the bump up to 5-star territory. I believe he's now top 10 in the nation. I mean, look, he's a freak show. He was there as well, caught up with him a little bit. OU did a good job. Just I still feel like he's either going to Alabama or Georgia. He was supposed to commit to the Crimson Tide pretty much earlier this month, got pushed back. Bulldogs are having to say, obviously, like I've talked about here on the show, OU had him in town whenever OU beat Alabama. So, maybe there's a shot. I know Jordan Edmonds' mom told me they really enjoyed Norman. I think it was a good trip. I just still think that, especially with him probably going to Bama and Georgia in the coming weeks for the spring and then obviously in the summer as well, he'll probably still official visit to OU in the summer, but I still get the read out of the weekend that it's Bama or Georgia for him.
So a couple of nice updates there on guys that we've talked about on the show with Beck and Edmonds, and guys that Collin is a fan of both. And we'll keep an eye on both those names as we continue to go along over the next few months and into the summer, obviously, as well. As far as, before we get out of here, some other kind of visits post Future Freaks weekend. We talked about Jonathan Hatton earlier and the commit and then decommitted and now getting kind of back in the mix. You have a few guys you want to get into here first, but I'll segue it and intro it with Zane Rowe, who was in town, obviously defensive end from Denton Geyer, 2027, right, for Zane.
Yes.
Was obviously no you commit, end up decommitting. It's funny because we had the open practice on Monday, and we're out there. I put up a highlight tape of the practice, which is still on the YouTube channel. You can check it out. And Collin, you texted me and said, "Did I see Zane Rowe in one of those clips?" And sure enough, I went back and looked. It's like, that was Zane Rowe. I didn't really even think about it at the time. I was focused on Marvin Jones Jr. in the particular clip. But Zane Rowe was in town. So he was on campus this week. Talk about him and Oklahoma getting back in the mix with him. Obviously, a guy that we talked about before is you talk about future freaks, a guy who's got a chance to be a really talented player at the next level, still has a couple of years of high school left, but then some other visits over the last week that are of intrigue that you fans should know about.
Yeah, what a professional you are with that segue. So you are right. I texted you because
it was sloppy-ish, but it works.
I thought you executed well. Like, it's all about getting the shot up and making it in. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, hey, by the way, Zane Rowe, basketball player.
There you go.
Anyway, we're just in a silly, goofy mood. It's been a hectic week. A lot going on. Speaking of that, though, Zane Rowe. So I knew that out of that crazy weekend, I'm running around with my hair on fire. Some of the other guys I'm getting ready to talk about, I knew that these guys were going to be on campus. I had talked to sources around them, kind of gotten some intel out of that. On a few other fronts, Zane Rowe snuck right under my nose between Future Freaks weekend and then some of the other guys I'm getting ready to talk about. And it was significant, but I also think it was kind of an illustration of the situation, because ever since Zane Rowe decommitted, the story was, Oklahoma's kind of just slipped into the shadows here because he wanted to explore. He wanted to strike out into the world and go explore other programs. Texas is really surged here. You hear Georgia making advancements. Obviously, the likes of A&M or Miami or whoever else are going to be in the mix. And so, Zane Rowe had told me and a number of others that he probably wasn't going to be around Norman much this spring. And he pops up at OU for a practice, and I thought, man, it's a pretty big deal, because I don't want to be Captain Obvious here and be like, oh, it shows you he's still interested. It's like, no, duh, dude. What are we doing? But at the same time, I would say that it kind of reiterates just how much Oklahoma means to him, that he would kind of go out of his way to go to a place that originally he thought he probably didn't want to see too much around this time of year. And so, kind of on that note, Oklahoma's still very much in play for Zane Rowe. They're still very much towards the top of the race. It's just about letting this thing continue to play out. And so I will say that I'm headed to OT7 this weekend, one of the biggest 7-on-7 tournaments in the country. They're here in Dallas, and Zane Rowe's expected to play in the tournament. I'm going to catch up with him this weekend, and we'll have that content for the subscribers at SoonersIllustrated.com. And so
passes, Zane.
He's going to catch some passes, man. And
that's always the best thing, those big defensive guys in the 7-on-7s. I simply remember watching Joe get out and catching some fades. Fun to get him out in space.
Some of these guys that are going to play defensive end, they just play inside linebacker or tight end, and they go get after it, get mobile a little bit. But hey, man, look, not only Zane Rowe, a basketball player, defensive lineman, people forget that at one point we thought he potentially was going to go play tight end at the next level. Yeah. So it's not like this guy's just out there messing around. He at one point thought he was going to go line it up in 12 personnel for Geyer and play a little flex tight end. Excited to see him this weekend. By the way, I don't know if you or anyone else watching the show saw the documentary that Under Armour put out about him this weekend, but worth the watch, certainly. Zane Rowe getting a doc by Under Armour.
Yeah, no, good to know. No, I definitely check that out.
Definitely give it a look. They did a really good job. Zane, it really shows you the kind of guy he is, man. He's already a 4-year NFL vet. He's going to go play in the Under Armour All-American game. They finalized that a couple weeks ago. So congrats to him. Excited to see him this weekend. All right, real quick on the couple others. 2026, Talanoa Illy, elite linebacker, hovering in the 5-star territory, number 32 in the nation. Number 1 player in the state of Hawaii. There you go. Top 3 linebacker in the country. Oklahoma's been around this one for a while. 6'3", 215 pounds. This is, I couldn't even tell you how many times that the Illy family has gotten to Norman, but kind of goes to show you just how much interest that they have in the program. Oregon's been considered the favorite here for a long time, but a number of others are not quitting, rightfully so. This guy is a freak show. Really high character kid. The family's awesome. So he was in town in Norman on Monday. Another productive trip. I know that Brent Venables spent some time with him one-on-one and with the family during spring practice. So very notable there. He's still striking out on a couple of trips.
Yeah.
And then Brian Swanson, elite offensive tackle from South Oak Cliff, Dallas, Texas, guy I've known for a long time. This one is another one that's probably going to end up being Oklahoma and Texas when it's all said and done. I know that I want to say Alabama is heavily involved. I believe A&M is heavily involved, but OU and Texas very much towards the top, and continue to speak to a number of sources around this one. You know, I think that with Brian, it is very much the case where he's pretty much fallen in love with Oklahoma. Like he loves Oklahoma, and he really likes Bill Bedenbaugh. I think he has a lot of love for Texas as well. And so I think he likes a lot of other programs, but OU and Texas, like,
sure,
they have Brian Swanson's attention and then some. And the last guy I want to talk about. Now, OU did have a couple of other running backs in town in the 2027 class, a couple guys cycling through. But, man, Josh, as you'll remember, I took a lot of time to talk about my guy Malachi Ziegler a couple of weeks ago. Out of the blue, I brought this guy up. 2027 quarterback ranked in the top 50 in the nation in 2027. We've talked about Peyton Houston. We've talked about some of these other cats. Malachi Ziegler was taking some time to check out Norman for the first time. And no offer has been reported yet.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting. Malachi himself reached out to me being like, hey, I want to let you know I'm going to Oklahoma this week. It'll be on Thursday. And I went, okay.
Noted. Yeah.
Because it's one thing when you hear from a source or you hear from the recruiting trail. When the kid reaches out and tells you, hey, man, like I'm going to Oklahoma this week, the guy's fired up to be there. And he wants it known that he's coming. And so if Oklahoma makes it official and they offer this player, I see a real opportunity. 6'3", 205 pounds. I'm just gonna say it. When a guy says, like, you know, it's probably Baylor and Mississippi State in the top, Notre Dame, USC, a couple others in the mix.
Yeah.
Oklahoma has a chance to skyrocket in this recruitment. Yeah, man. Malachi Ziegler takes the trip. We'll see if they officially stamp him with an offer. But I think that if and when it comes, Oklahoma and Malachi Ziegler could very much be a thing. And so, obviously, they had the massive recruiting weekend. But as you can see, they continue to cycle a lot of these guys through. I'm tripping up, too, mentally, by the way. Just quick tangent, because I was under the impression that Talanoa Illy was living in California, and now we list him in Hawaii. I don't know if that's a database glitch. What's going on?
Yeah.
I'm all over the place, but I mean, again, high-profile prospects still cycling through Norman as the spring rolls on.
No doubt. And yeah, Ziegler, you know, we've talked about him before, but I mean, top 50 player and a top 5 quarterback in 2027. So certainly a name to keep in mind. We talked a lot about Peyton Houston there in 2027, but some other QB names that Collin brought up there that will be important to know. And Ziegler obviously in town there. I guess that was yesterday. So we'll keep an eye on that. More to go on. And then, yeah, circling back to Brian Swanson too. You know, I like to kind of look up guys as you're bringing them up so I can make sure I'm keeping up and knowing who you're talking about. Swanson, 6'5", 295, and he's a top 70 player in the class, top 10 tackle, top 10 player in Texas. That'll do. That's the kind of guy that you like. So good to hear on him as well because, yeah. Oh, and by the way, he's 2027, so he's technically still in his sophomore year of high school right now.
Yeah,
that's a big kid for sophomore year of high school.
I mean, I like to tell the story of Brian Swanson has a different mentality. He's an extreme competitor. He's got a lot of he's the kind of kid that'll make a lot of jokes. Yeah. But he is also one of the fiercest competitive offensive tackles I've been around. Mm-hmm. And last summer when we were at OU summer camp, he was telling everyone going in that he knew Zane Rowe was going to be there. And I mean, Zane Rowe he just put out that he's visiting Georgia right now. Zane Rowe is a high profile player. Brian Swanson went in and then went to the camp and pretty much called out Zane Rowe himself and won almost every single rep against Zane while he was committed to Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And like, it's one thing to be a highly ranked player. Brian Swanson's already one of the best offensive linemen in the entire state of Texas, man. He's one of my favorites. He is a dude. And like, he wants to, I mean, for lack of a better term, he wants to fight people. Like, he wants to beat the crap out of anyone he can. And I think it's so cool.
Yeah. No doubt. And yeah, the way that, offensive line recruiting seems to have a lot of momentum right now for Oklahoma. It's like if they can parlay all this momentum with, some success, more success on the field and continue to build it, you're going to have just kind of seems like a revolving door with how many big time tackles are in the state of Texas every year. It's like you can kind of really keep it rolling. It feels like if you can play your cards right.
Yeah,
I think that's it. I mentioned this on the to our members over on Sooners Illustrated, Oklahoma247sports.com. But wife and I are expecting our first big child here very soon. Due date's actually tomorrow, so any day now. So the plan here, essentially, if there's no baby, we'll be back on Monday. Tom, James, and myself will recap. Obviously, a big weekend for both basketball teams. We'll have the NCAA tournament bracket, all that stuff to talk about on Monday. We'll also continue some spring ball stuff and Diamond Sports, all that good stuff. That'll be on Monday. That's if no child. If there is a child, we will probably put the show in a little bit of a break, not real long, couple weeks or so. I can catch my bearings, get my life in order, and then we'll pick things back up in a couple weeks. If she still doesn't come by the later part of next week, Collin and I can probably catch up on some other recruiting stuff. That'd be a little late, but you never know. I mean, I was 10 days late whenever I was born, so it's possible. It's a thing. So just a little bit of heads up there. If the show goes away, you're kind of wondering why there ain't been an episode in like a week or two. That is why. But we'll be back. It won't be a real long break whenever that may happen, but just a heads up there. So probably back Monday, but maybe not. We're on a day-to-day right now over here. In the Callaway household, he's living day-to-day, really hour by hour right now, frankly. So that's where we're at.
Look, for those of you out there watching or listening, if you are the praying type like me, Josh, prayers and thoughts to you, Madeline, and the upcoming daughter. I encourage everyone out there in Sooner Nation or whoever's watching to extend some thoughts and prayers to the Callaway family as well, because can't wait to welcome a new baby girl to the Sooners Illustrated family, man. Couldn't be happier for y'all.
Really appreciate it. Appreciate everyone. And so, just a heads up there. If the next episode doesn't come on Monday, that's probably why. So we'll see you then. Maybe, possibly. We'll talk then. If not, we'll see you when we see you. That's it for now. Again, subscribe to Sooners Illustrated, Oklahoma247sports.com. A lot more coverage to come. Tom was one of the very few OU media members that was in Nashville for the SEC tournament. Got a lot of good stuff and a lot more to come. He'll be getting on the road, we assume, wherever they head for the NCAA tournament. Well, I guess don't count your chickens before they hatch with the way that has gone for that program. But I think they're in good shape to make it. So a lot more coverage to come there, as well as for the women, Diamond Sports, recruiting, spring ball. It's all at Sooners Illustrated, Oklahoma247sports.com. That's it for now. We'll see you next time. For Collin Kenny, I'm Josh Callaway. We'll see you next time right back here, as always, on the Sooners Illustrated podcast.